Welcome to EPG Pathshala in the subject Information Technology in the paper of Distributed Application Development. And this module is about HTTP specific API. And in this module, we will learn about the various classes and interfaces from the javax.servlet.http package of the servlet specifications. Fine. We will also learn about the HTTP servlet request, the HTTP servlet response interfaces, and also how do we develop servlets by extending from the HTTP servlet class. In the earlier module, we have seen the API for the general part of the API. We have explored the javax.servlet package. Right. Now we are looking at the javax.servlet.http package. Yes, as far as the servlet specification is concerned, what it says is the specification is general. It says yes, any request response based protocol can be supported by the implementation of the servlet specification, but one thing which is mandatory is whatever is your servlet container, all servlet containers must implement and support the HTTP protocol, and therefore it is part of the servlet specification itself that we have the package called javax.servlet.http, which is talking about specifics of HTTP protocol. Fine. So, here we may have to recollect what we have done in the HTTP protocol. Fine. The various parts of the HTTP protocol. Fine. So, let us see what we have here. We have seen as far as from the generic API, we have seen the interfaces like the servlet request and the servlet response, fine, which were very general. There was nothing specific about HTTP protocol there. But when we talk of javax.servlet.http package, what it has done is it has additional interfaces. It has an interface called HTTPServletRequest, HTTPServletResponse. These are the interfaces which are extending from the generic interfaces. The general interface was servlet request and servlet response. So, those are being extended to have the API which is specific to HTTP protocol. In fact, what exactly happens? Whenever a request arrives, since the request which comes is from a HTTP, it is a HTTP request which has come. The containers in fact creating objects which are implementations of HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. They are not only the implementation of servlet request and servlet response. Of course, this HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response are extending from the servlet request and servlet response which are from the javax.servlet package. Fine. So, here what we do in this module is we will cover these two interfaces, HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, and of course, earlier we have seen the class called generic servlet. What we have here is another class called HTTP servlet, fine, which is nothing but extending from the generic servlet class. We will see what goes there, fine. So, what are all the things which are part of the HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response, what is additional there, fine, and the other thing which is related to the class called HTTP servlet, fine. Okay, so let us begin with the just by understanding what is additionally there in the HTTP servlet request. Okay, servlet request was very general. It just says, oh, you could have any parameters. It says you could have content, fine. Of course, when it comes to HTTP, HTTP also has that, right? HTTP can have parameters. How do we have parameters using HTTP? Oh, there are two of those ways. One is as part of URL itself, someone could put those query string, a question mark, parameter name equal to value, ampersand parameter name equal to value. You could have any number of parameters being specified as part of the URL itself. So, if that is the case, yes, our HTTP it's going to be available in the servlet request itself. But yes, parameters which were in the generic part are actually nothing but for HTTP it is coming from the query string when it is a URL based. Fine, it can be in the query string of a URL. Another way it could be, yes, it is when someone submits a form, okay, that form, HTML form. In the HTML form, we know there is form and slash form. Fine. In the form, we are able to specify method equal to post or method equal to get. What happens when someone says method equal to get? When someone says method equal to get, the parameters, fine, the parameters which are nothing coming from the input tags of the form, okay, all those goes as parameter, but they become part of the URL. If the method was specified as post, no, they won't become part of the URL, but instead what will be going is, yes, it will go as part of the content. Fine. In the content, it would be nothing but the same. What was the query string? We had parameter name equal to value and parameter name equal to value. A similar string becomes the content of the HTTP request. Fine. So, yes, that is related to parameter. There is nothing additional method here being added in the HTTP servlet request for that. But parameter was part of the generic thing. So, parameters can be handled. Fine. Let us look at that structure of the HTTP request. If you look at that, what was it? It was having get, what was the request structure? First one was, it is a method name, right? Fine. What is there in a HTTP request? First line has method name, it might say get or post or something, fine, and then it will be having method name, it has the resource, the path, the resource, and then the protocol version. Fine. Okay, so fine. Let us see the methods what we have, because this is something which is specific to HTTP protocol. So, what we have is in our interface called HTTP servlet request, which is extending from the servlet request, we have additional methods for these. You might be interested in knowing what is the HTTP method, whether it is get or post or put or delete or trace, or we have those various methods, HTTP methods. So, what is the method? So, we even have method called get method, which returns a string. This is a method from the HTTP servlet request. You could get the string part, the method part. You are interested in the resource. Now again, the URL which has come, you have a method called get request URL, which would give us the whole URL as a string buffer object. It is a string buffer. Yes, it is a string buffer, which means it is modifiable. It can be modified before it is getting forwarded to a request dispatcher. We understand it is the same request object which is being forwarded, or someone might modify it and then forward it. By modifying, someone may keep on adding some parameters also. Yes, that could be done. So, those manipulations are possible. So, we have a get requested URL as a method which gives us a string buffer. We even have method to get us the various parts of the URL. In this URL, from the servlet specification point of view, yes, what do we have? We have the application name as the first part of the URL, fine, the first part slash, the very first unit, fine, first thing is the application name. So, you are interested in knowing what is the application name, the servlet may be interested in knowing that. So, from the servlet request, fine, from the HTTP servlet request, we have this method called get context, get request context, fine, that gives us the part which is related to the application, fine. Then we have the method which will be specifying, what part of your URL has identified the servlet. You know, there is a URL pattern which is then mapped to find out which servlet to use. So, what was that, which part of the URL matched the pattern because of which this invocation has taken place. So, for that again we have a method called get requested, fine, get requested servlet, fine, or sorry, it's a method called get servlet path, fine. So, you can know the servlet path, the path which is responsible for identification of the servlet, fine. And then after the servlet, for example, if you have that wildcard thing, you would have /* at the end, fine. So, whatever is after the /* part, if there is something which matches in the current URL to it, fine, that could also be identified separately by giving get request get path info. Get path info is the additional part which is available to us. So, if we have a HTTP servlet request, yes, we can not only get the parameters which is anyway from the super interface, but we can get the method name, we can get the various parts of the URL, we can get the whole URL as a string buffer also, we can get the various parts of the URL, the part which is identifying the application name, the part which is identified the servlet, and the additional path if it is there. We even have method called getQueryString to know what is there in the query string. Fine. So, fine, that's from the first part. Oh, then we have the protocol. Yeah, we even have that method called getProtocol. Yes, what is a protocol being fine? So, we have that third component, like it says this request is for HTTP 1.1 or 1.0 or something. So, you can know what is that the request, what is the protocol being used here. So, you can know that by using the method called getProtocol. Fine. We even have method to know in the URL, you might have used HTTP, or sometimes for a secure URL you might have used HTTPS. So, you can even know that also by using the method called getScheme. Scheme will identify that protocol HTTP or HTTPS what is being followed here, fine, in the URL string. Or you might have, okay, you might just be interested in knowing whether this is using secure a secure protocol or not. So, you even have a method called is secure. So, if it is HTTPS, yes, it would say is secure is true, fine. So, fine, that is a method initially, but then if we go further in the in a HTTP request, what are the further things in HTTP request? Okay. After the first line, what were the other things? Oh, we had the headers. Oh, you might be interested in knowing what all headers have come with their values. So, we have methods to fetch the header values in from the request which has arrived. So, here we have methods like getHeader names to give us all the headers. It would be returning an enumeration of string. We can use the method called getHeaders, which takes a header name, because same header may have multiple values. So, it would return an array of string getHeaders, or you may simply use the method called getHeader with only the name, but in this case it would give you the first value of the header, fine, if there are multiple same header being repeated multiple times, fine. So, we can get to know about any header. Oh, we even have methods for some of the commonly used headers. We might have header specific methods. For example, there is a header for the content type. So, you might use the method called getContentType straight away, or you use the method called getHeader where you pass content type as a parameter. So, say for some popular header names, we might have some ready-made methods instead of using the method called getHeader, fine, and passing the name of a header. There might be a few for some of the commonly used headers, we may have a convenient method in our HTTP servlet request. In the HTTP servlet request, we even have methods for one was related to the header. Okay, coming to the headers itself, we have the method called getHeader, which takes a string and gives a string. Many times you might have header, say for example, the content length header. Look at that header. What is the return type? Content length, we understand, is going to be an integer value, fine. So, instead of using a method called getHeader giving content length as a parameter and then using a parseInt method to get it converted into an int, fine, or for that matter any other header which we understand the value is going to be an integer type. Instead of using a parseInt separately, you have convenient methods. So, wherever you know this header has an integer value, you could be using the method called getIntHeader, fine. It is simply same as getHeader, but also doing conversion into the int type for us, fine. Same way, there are headers which are nothing but date time headers. You have headers like last modified, fine. You might have some other headers which are nothing but representative of date and time. If we have such headers, fine, fine. If modified since is another one, fine. If modified since, oh, that is a header. So, if modified since is useful when there is some caching being done, fine. So, if we have some headers which are involving date and time, as far as date and time is concerned, the HTTP protocol says, there are 3 different formats of the dates which are going to be supported in the HTTP protocol. So, when the request comes for a specific header which has a date information, you would be having different formats. So, if you use the getHeader method and then try to parsing, you will have to try all the 3 formats. You will have to identify which format does it follow, which date time format follows, and then do the proper parsing yourself. Instead of that, a very convenient method called, just like we had the getInt header, here we also have a method called getDateHeader. The getDateHeader, you pass a header name, it returns long, whichever time in milliseconds, which is a very standard thing in Java, right. In the Java API, we understand date and time are always, most of the time are specified as time in milliseconds since the epoch, fine. So, that is another convenient method for reading date kind of headers. Again, some other common headers, some very common things could be, we have this method called getCookies to return an array of cookie. Of course, we will be looking at later what is this business with the cookies thing, fine, or what are these cookies for, fine. But yes, there is some header for the cookie, fine. We have methods for what kind of authentication, there might be authentication which has been done. So, we have methods even for authentication, what kind of authentication was carried out. So, getAuthType, we have method to know if authentication has been carried out, fine. Who is the user, who is logged, who is the current user, from where the request has come. So, we even have method like getRemoteUser, fine, or getUserPrincipal to return an object of principal, which is part of the java.security package. Principal is there in the java.security package, fine. So, yes, you can get it as a principal. Principal in turn has the method called getName, whereby you can get the name of the user anyway. So, fine. So, you have these methods which are part of the HTTP servlet request, fine. So, like this, okay, HTTP servlet request, headers were there, and then as far as the content is concerned, yes, we already know the methods for reading the content part. Those are nothing but the inherited methods from servlet request. So, fine, that we already know about. So, fine. So, now let us proceed forward and look at the methods for the HTTP servlet response part. Yes, if you look at the response, again the structure of the response, what was the structure? First was protocol. What was the second field in the first line of the HTTP response? That was the 3-letter code, which was the response code, 3-letter response code, fine. Let us look at the HTTP response part, fine. Looking at the HTTP response, yes, we know the first part is the first line in the HTTP response is the line which specifies the protocol version, and then immediately following the protocol version is the response code, the 3-digit code, fine. And I think in the HTTP protocol we already discussed the meanings corresponding to the 3-digit codes, fine. We have those categories 1XX to 100 to 199, that category is informational, fine. 200 to 299, that is for successful responses. 300 to 399 is mainly for redirections. 400 to 499 is for request errors in the request, not authenticated or any such things, fine, or the what you have requested is not available, it is not there, not found. 404 not found was an example. And similarly, the category is 500 to 599, where we got some error on the server side, okay, fine. So, we already are aware of those, so fine. So, if we come to, because now this is about specific to HTTP protocol, the HTTP servlet response has the method called getStatus, fine, which can give us the status code of what is the response, it's a set status rather, fine. We can set up the status what we want to send to the as part of the response. Here, because it is a server side, we are actually setting up the response. So, as part of setting up the response, you can set up the response status also. Okay, you want to send a specific response to the client, we have the method called sendError. Don't go by the method name. SendError is a method in the HTTP servlet response which takes a integer, the status code, and a string for the message. When we use a send error method, it is this status code. It is nothing. It's not that, oh, it would be an error. You might be giving a successful status code here and a message. When we use the send error method, the container has its own specific template according to which it will send a content. It will send the response. As far as the status code is concerned, it will be this status code, the code which we use in the send error method. Fine. So, send error does not necessarily mean, oh, there is an error response, or it could be any response. You are setting up the response code for it, fine, and sending some kind of a content. But yes, of course, normally, as the same name suggests, we use it normally for sending errors, because if we have successful things, we are the ones who are actually writing the content. We do not have to specify any status code. When the container is sending the response, it would by default put the 200 OK thing, fine. So, we have this method called send error as well, fine, which will be able to send up set up the 3-digit code. Okay. Going further, we have the headers. Okay. By default, certain headers may be already, there will be some default values, some of the headers. Yes, what will be the server, fine, there are response headers. So, the response headers, again we have our some default values will be there for some common headers decided by the container. You can change them. So, you want to set up some other headers which are not normally sent. We have this method called setHeader, fine. There are certain common things which are also being done, fine. For example, we might have to set a header for whenever we do a redirection. Oh, we are saying, oh, we want to send a 301, but we want to set up some headers and we want to set up. No, we do not need to do all that up. We have convenience method. We have a convenience method called send redirect, fine, where you specify that you specify the new location. You do not have to set up a header for the location. You specify a string for the location, the URL string for the location, new location, and just say send redirect. The appropriate status code and the appropriate location header and the other content would then be sent by the container for us. We do not have to set up anything else. We just say send redirect. We should know what is the URL where we want to this request to be redirected to. So, convenience method called send redirect, fine. Okay. Same way, we will have certain other methods which are related to setting the things for the cookies, fine, which we will be covering when we look at the cookies part. Okay. So, we have methods like add cookie for that purpose, and fine. So, we got convenience method in the fine, send redirect, send okay, fine, and okay, fine. We even have methods because many times when we want to say send redirect, okay, we are passing a URL, but then that URL maybe we want to have some escaping turn for us, okay, and when we talk of later when we look at a session, the session information also sometimes need to be included as part of the URL itself. So, we got method, convenient method available in the HTTP servlet response called encode URL, fine. So, this could be used for encoding a URL by removing the escape sequences for us, fine. So, that it would be then be easier to use as part of send redirect method, fine. So, we got methods for setting up headers again. We got method called setHeader, where we specify. So, if you want to set up the headers, we got the method called setHeader, give a header name and a corresponding value. That is one thing. So, that will replace any header if it was having a previous same header was used earlier, but same header multiple values, that could also be possible. So, for that we even have another method called addHeader. Both of these, setHeader, addHeader, both of them have the convenient form in case the headers values are of integer type or they are of a date type. You have the convenience method called addIntHeader or setIntHeader. Same way we have the addDateHeader and the setDateHeader. Those convenient methods are available in case the type, the value for the header is a int or a date type, fine. So, those are some very convenient methods available in the HTTP servlet response, okay, fine. So, there are various other methods also, convenient methods available within the HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet responses. Okay, fine. Fine. So, we got to know, yes, that now we have, as far as javax.servlet.http is concerned, we got these interfaces HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, which are specific to the HTTP protocol, taking care of the things available in the HTTP protocol, fine, to help us with the HTTP protocol, fine. So, fine. Now, coming to the development of a servlet, we have seen two ways of creating a servlet. One was using implementation of servlet, another was extending from generic servlet, or you could have even used that base servlet, fine, which we had developed earlier, fine. Or now, let us look at another thing. Since we are talking about specific of HTTP specific protocol, we even have one more class available as part of the API, fine. In the javax.servlet.http package, there is a class called HTTPServlet. Okay. Oh, what does this class have? Yes, this is the class which actually extends from the generic servlet. This class extends from generic servlet. So, it has all the methods of servlet, though this class is abstract, does not have any abstract methods, and this is simply an abstract class. Okay. So, let us see how it overrides some of the methods from the generic servlet and how it adds a few more methods to it. Okay. So, fine, one of the methods which was abstract there in the generic servlet, what was that method? Oh, that was the service method, fine, which was left out, but we understand what was there in the service method. The parameters were servlet request and servlet response, which is actually from the generic part. So, we have that method being overridden here. This method has been overridden to simply invoke another form of the service method. So, we have one more service method added in the HTTP servlet class. What has been added here is a method called service again. This service method has parameters which are of type HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. So, the implementation of the earlier service method is to simply cast the request and response objects, the servlet request, servlet response objects into HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response, and then invoke the other service method. The other service method which takes HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response as parameters. Okay, fine, this is good, but then what next? Oh, what is the code for this? Oh, even this method has some implementation. There is an implementation of this service method which has HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response as parameter. What has been done here in the implementation is, we understand that there was that method, fine. In a request, we have a method. The HTTP method is get method or post method or a head method or put method, delete, trace, fine, various methods were there. Okay. So, fine, I may be interested in handling only the get method. If it is a get, then I would like to do this. If it is a post, I might like to handle it differently, or maybe I do not want to handle it. I do not want to support some other method. Okay, fine. So, for that, to make this possible, what has been done here is the service method which takes HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response has been written in a manner where the first thing it does is looks at the HTTP request, finds out the method, what is the method which is used, and then it says, okay, if the method is get, then I will use the do get method. If the method is post, then I will use the do post method. Of course, these are methods now which have been added, the do get, do post, do head, do trace, like this. For each of those HTTP method, there is a separate method in our HTTP servlet class. So, we have various kinds of do methods, do get, do post, do head, do trace, all those things are there, fine. Okay. So, fine, here is the method, service method being invoked, which in turn would then invoke the method called do, the kind of do method depending on how the request has arrived. So, it detects what is the method in the request and then accordingly invokes the specific do method. Okay, fine. So, what exactly goes on? What is there? What is the code for the do method here? Oh, each of those do methods? Yes. Suppose, what is the code for the do method? Suppose, what is the default implementation of the do get method? Oh, the toGet method which we have in the HTTP servlet request is simply implementing by saying, oh, I will send an error that the get method is not supported. So, implementation of doGet, oh, I do not support the get method. Implementation of doPost, I do not support the post method. Oh, why such a thing? Oh, that is a default implementation. The idea here is, when you want to write a servlet, you will create a subclass of the HTTP servlet, and whichever method you want to support, you should be overriding that. The others by default would not be supported. Fine. That is the reason this is the implementation which has been given for the do methods. The do methods are simply doing, the default implementation here is to simply say, oh, I do not support that method. Fine. So, that is a way to do it. Fine. So, yes, now what are the ways to create a servlet, to write a servlet? Oh, we have now all the options available. First option, what we did with hello servlet, that was implementing the interface. Next option, extending from generic servlet. But since we know we have HTTP protocol, we need not go for those. Fine. We could we could also create a servlet by extending from HTTP servlet, and here again you do have the option of overriding any of those two service methods. None of those are final, fine, or either you extend those override those service methods, or you override the required do method. If you want to support the specific, oh, you only are interested in handling the get method, or you may be interested in handling more than one method. Maybe you are interested in handling get as well as post, and both of them doing the same thing. Fine, you could override both the do get method as well as the do post method, and one of them may simply pass on to the other one, or you may have two different ways of handling both the methods. Fine. So, it is going to be convenient that way. Fine. So, here what we have shown here is the different ways in which a servlet implementation can be written when we come to specific of HTTP protocol. And of course, most of the time when we talk of servlet, we are only doing HTTP protocol all the time. Fine. So, in this module we covered what is HTTP servlet request, what is HTTP servlet response, and the specific to HTTP, what is this, the class called HTTP servlet, how it has overridden the method from the by extending from generic servlet, how it has overridden the service method, and how it takes care of it. Fine. I think there is one more, there is one additional method which has been added in the, one more method which has been added in the HTTP servlet is the method called last modified to return long. Fine. This is simply to give a timestamp, kind of a timestamp for what you consider this URL, what is the last modification date and time for this. By default, it would return a -1 indicating, oh, you do not need to, you can't use this cached value here. Okay. Fine. So, that is it in this protocol, in this particular module. Fine. And in the next module, we will be looking at the other things which are related to cookies and session. Fine. That was something which was which is going to be available through the HTTP servlet request. Fine. We had that method called get cookies, and we even have another method which is related to session. We have a method in HTTP servlet request called get session. Fine. So, what is this cookies and what are sessions? Fine. Those are the things which we will be covering in the next module. Fine. So, in summary, so in this module we have covered the HTTP servlet request, the HTTP servlet response, and the HTTP servlet, how it extends from. We have also seen how an HTTP servlet extends from the generic servlet and implements the service method. Fine. Okay. So, that is it. Thank you.